If you're watching this, you probably had a moment where you felt invisible. A moment where someone younger, slicker, and more confident looked right through you, assuming you were just a piece of the furniture, a relic from a time they'd only read about in history books. They see the gray hair and the wrinkles around the eyes, and they make a calculation. They decide you're slow, you're confused, you're not worth their time. They're usually wrong. In my case, they were catastrophically wrong. My name is Quentin. I'm 67 years old, and for 30 of those years I wrote software for international business machines. IBM. We used to call it I've Been Moved, because they'd ship us all over the country to fix problems no one else could solve. I was good at it. I was good at finding the ghost in the machine, the tiny error in a million lines of code that could bring a whole system to its knees. I retired about 5 years ago after my wife Helen passed. We had this whole plan, you see. A quiet life in this small house we'd bought 30 years prior. We'd paid it off. The mortgage was a ghost of its own. The plan was simple: live on my pension, her social security, and enjoy the predictability of it all. No more frantic calls in the middle of the night about a server farm in Poughkeepsie having a meltdown. Just quiet mornings, a cup of coffee, and the crossword puzzle. After Helen was gone, the quiet was a lot louder, but the plan remained. Predictability. That was the key. Which is why, when my monthly bill from the power company started to act like a nervous teenager's growth spurt, I noticed. It wasn't a sudden spike, it was a creep. A slow, insidious crawl. $10 one month, 15 the next, 25 after that. At first I did what most people do. I blamed myself. Did I leave the television on? Was the new refrigerator less efficient than the salesman claimed? I started turning things off with a religious fervor. I'd walk through my two-bedroom house, a silent sentinel of energy conservation, unplugging the toaster, the coffee maker, the lamp in the guest room that hadn't been used in years. I sat in the dark more often than not, reading by the fading sunlight like some character out of a Dickens novel. But the bill kept climbing. It made no sense. I was a single man. A quiet man. I ate simple meals. I went to bed at 10. According to Viridian Power Solutions, my quiet little cottage was consuming electricity on par with a Las Vegas casino. The final straw, the one that broke the back of my quiet, predictable retirement, was a bill for $412. For 1 month. I looked at it, and something inside me, a tightly wound coil of patience and grief, finally snapped. I called them. I navigated the automated phone tree, a labyrinth of cheerful, disembodied voices designed to break a man's spirit. Press 1 for billing. Press 4 for technical support. Press star to hear these options again. Finally, after what felt like a geological age, I was connected to a live human being. Her name was Brenda, and she had the chirpy, condescending tone of someone who has been trained to believe every customer is a liar or an idiot. I explained my situation, calmly and factually. I told her my historical usage. I told her about my Spartan, monastic lifestyle. I told her that a $400 bill was not just an error, it was an absurdity. Brenda let out a little, practiced sigh. The kind of sigh that says, "Oh, one of these calls." "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy, "I'm looking at your smart meter data right here, and it shows the usage is accurate. It's real-time data, you know. It can't be wrong." I felt my knuckles go white on the receiver of my old landline phone. I kept a landline for predictability, you see. It always worked. Unlike Brenda, I told her the data was nonsensical. I asked her to read it to me. She rattled off a series of numbers, kilowatt hours by the day, that were utterly meaningless without context. But it was the explanation that followed that truly lit the fuse. "Well, Mr. Quentin," she said, pausing to read my name as if it were a foreign word. "Often, with our senior customers, we find the issue isn't the meter, it's the appliances. Older appliances, you understand. They just aren't as efficient. Your refrigerator, your furnace, they can be real energy vampires. My appliances, she was blaming my refrigerator, which was less than a year old. She was blaming my furnace, which I had serviced every autumn. She was blaming me for being old. That was the subtext of it all. You're old, your things are old. You don't understand how this new world works. Just pay the bill, old man. I felt a cold fury, a type of anger I hadn't felt since I was a young man, a junior programmer, being told my code was elegant, but my solution was wrong by a manager who couldn't write a Hello World program. I took a deep breath. I said, Brenda, I was a software engineer for IBM for 30 years. I debugged mainframe operating systems. I think I know a thing or two about data, and I'm telling you, your data is garbage. There was a pause, not a respectful pause, a dismissive one, and then she laughed. A little chuckle. Okay, well, IBM, she said, as if I'd just told her I was a wizard. That's nice. But our system is state-of-the-art. If you'd like, we can schedule a technician to come out and inspect your home for a $150 fee, but I can guarantee you they'll tell you the same thing. It's your appliances. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I placed it very gently back in its cradle. The silence of the house rushed back in. But this time, it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. They had called me a confused old man. They had dismissed a lifetime of expertise with a chuckle. They had blamed my dead wife's favorite lamp. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the profound, infuriating disrespect. They had made a calculation, and they had gotten it wrong. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The anger didn't fade. It hardened. It settled deep in my chest, a cold, heavy ingot of resolve. For the rest of that day, I paced the small confines of my house, from the living room to the kitchen, past the closed door of Helen's sewing room, my footsteps wearing a groove in the hardwood floors that we had picked out together. Each pass was a review of the evidence. There was the new refrigerator, an Energy Star behemoth that was supposed to be the pinnacle of efficiency. There was the new washer and dryer set I'd bought after the old one finally gave up the ghost. My television was a modest flat screen, not some cinematic monstrosity. My life was small. My energy footprint should have been a faint whisper, not a bellowing roar. Every word of Brenda's chirpy, condescending voice echoed in my mind. Older appliances, you understand. Our senior customers. She hadn't seen me. She'd seen a demographic, a box to be checked, an easy mark. That night I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my study, a room I'd barely used since retiring. My old work computer was there, a custom-built tower from my final years at IBM. It wasn't a sleek, modern tablet or a featherlight laptop. It was a tank, a black, monolithic box with enough processing power to calculate the trajectory of a small moon. I'd kept it, not out of sentimentality, but out of a sense of preparedness. You never knew when you might need to do some heavy lifting. I sat down in the worn leather chair, the one with the permanent impression of my back, and I stared at the dark screen, and I thought about my career. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated joy of the hunt, the thrill of chasing a bug through a million lines of archaic COBOL or elegant C++. The bug was a ghost, a phantom that only existed in the logic of the machine, but its effects were real. Crashed systems, corrupted data, millions of dollars lost. My job was to make the ghost reveal itself, to corner it, identify it, and extinguish it. It required patience. It required a deep, almost obsessive attention to detail. It required the ability to hold an entire complex system in your head at once. My colleagues used to joke that I could see the Matrix. They'd bring me problems that had stumped entire teams for weeks. They'd slide a printout thick as a phone book onto my desk and say, "Quentin, we're lost." And I would dive in. I would forget to eat. I would forget to sleep. I would live inside the logic, tracing every variable, every function call, every loop, until I found it. That one misplaced semicolon. That one incorrect Boolean operator. The single tiny flaw that caused the cascade of failure. And the feeling, the moment of discovery, was like nothing else on earth. It was a jolt of pure intellectual satisfaction, a quiet, private victory that no manager's praise or corporate bonus could ever replicate. And then I thought of Helen. I remembered a conversation we'd had right after I'd accepted the retirement package. We were sitting on the porch swing, the one I'd installed myself. It was a warm summer evening. She had her head on my shoulder. She'd said, "No more fires to put out, Q. No more chasing ghosts. Just us. Simple. Predictable." She'd squeezed my hand. "We've earned it. The rising bills weren't just a financial problem. They were a violation of that promise. A chaotic, unpredictable variable inserted into the elegant equation of our life plan. The company, Viridian, in their arrogance, was desecrating a memory. They were taking something that was supposed to be safe and turning it into a source of anxiety and anger. And they were doing it while patting me on the head and telling me I was too old to understand. The next morning I saw my neighbor Arthur wrestling with his garbage can out by the curb. Arthur was a good man, a retired history teacher, sharp as a tack, but his body was starting to fail him. He was a widower, too, and we had a comfortable, unspoken alliance. We'd check on each other. I'd help him with heavy lifting. He'd bring over a portion of whatever casserole he'd made too much of. I walked over, my own ridiculous power bill clutched in my hand. "Morning, Arthur," I said. He grunted, finally getting the can to the curb, and wiped his brow with the back of a shaky hand. He looked tired, more tired than usual. "Morning, Quentin," he sighed. "Just paying my tribute to the sanitation gods." I held up the bill. "Speaking of tribute to the gods," I said, "did you get your letter from the high priests at Viridian this month?" Arthur's face, normally placid and thoughtful, darkened. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his own bill, already opened, the edges crumpled. He didn't have to say a word. I saw the amount, $450, for a man who lived on oatmeal and toast and spent most of his days reading in an armchair. "It's theft, Quentin," he said, his voice low and trembling with a quiet rage. "It's highway robbery, but they do it with a friendly logo." He leaned against his fence, looking defeated. "I called them," he said. "They told me it was my water heater. My water heater. It's brand new." "They told me it was my refrigerator," I said, "and all my other old appliances." Arthur nodded, a bitter, knowing look on his face. "Of course they did. We're the perfect scapegoats. The confused seniors. What are we going to do? Half the folks in this neighborhood are on fixed incomes." He hesitated, looking away down the quiet suburban street. He looked embarrassed, ashamed. "I had to put off refilling one of my prescriptions this month, Quentin. My heart medication. It was either that or have the lights shut off. I told myself it would be fine, just for a couple of weeks." He looked at me then, and I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger, fear. My own indignation, which had been a hot, righteous fire, suddenly felt selfish. My pension was solid. I could absorb the cost, even if it infuriated me. Arthur couldn't. How many other Arthurs were there in Maple Creek Villas? How many of my neighbors were making quiet, desperate choices between medicine and electricity, between food and heat? This wasn't just about my pride anymore. This was about Arthur's heart. It was about my community. This was a bug in the system, and it was causing real human damage. That was the moment, the catalyst. I looked from Arthur's worried face to the bill in my hand to the quiet houses lining the street, every one of them a potential victim. I put my hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady and clear, "don't you worry about the prescription. You go get it. I'll spot you the cash." and I'm going to fix this. I'm going to find out what they're doing." He looked at me, skeptical. "How, Quentin? They're $1 billion company. We're just a couple of old guys." I gave him a small, thin smile. "They have $1 billion company," I said. "But I have a computer, and I have time." I walked back to my house, the anger now channeled, focused. It was a laser beam. The hunt was on. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. But I had a feeling that in the end they would look an awful lot like the same thing. I went back to my study and sat down in front of the monolithic black tower. For the first time in 5 years I felt a familiar hum, not from the computer's fans, but inside my own head. It was the feeling of a problem, space opening up, a complex puzzle waiting to be solved. My first step wasn't to code, it was to reconnoiter. In my IBM days, we called it reading the terrain. You don't charge into a battle without a map. My battlefield was Viridian Power Solutions, and my map was their digital footprint. I started with their corporate website. It was a slick, soulless affair, full of stock photos of smiling, diverse families basking in the glow of energy-efficient light bulbs. It was a monument to public relations, designed to project an image of transparency and customer centricity. And that's where I found my way in, buried deep in a submenu under investors and then corporate responsibility. I found a section on their open data initiative. It was a PR gimmick, plain and simple. A way for them to boast about how forward-thinking and transparent they were. They had created a public API, an application programming interface, that allowed anyone to access anonymized smart meter data from their entire network. They probably imagined a few university students using it for a thesis paper, or some green energy startup using it to build a conservation app. They never in a million years imagined someone like me. Someone who knew exactly what to do with raw data. I spent the next 2 days doing nothing but reading the API documentation. It was dense, technical, and full of corporate jargon, but to me it was poetry. It was the blueprint of their system, and they had just handed it to me on a silver platter. I learned how their data was structured, the protocols they used, the query limits, the authentication tokens. I felt a grim satisfaction. They had built the weapon, loaded it, and polished it. All I had to do was aim it. My first ally, whether he knew it or not, was Arthur. I needed more than just my own anecdotal evidence. I needed a data set, a human one. I explained to him, in the simplest terms I could, what I was doing. "Arthur," I'd said over a cup of coffee at my kitchen table, "they've opened a window into their systems. I can look inside, but I need to know where to point the flashlight."
Fair.
He understood immediately. He became my field agent. While I was in my digital bunker, deciphering code, Arthur was on the ground, conducting quiet interviews. He was the perfect man for the job. He was trusted. People talked to him. He'd stop to chat with Mrs. Gable while she was gardening. He'd have a lemonade with Mr. Chen on his porch. He'd call up old friends in other parts of the senior community. He carried a small notebook, just like he had as a teacher, and he took meticulous notes. What was their bill last year? What is it this year? When did it start going up? And then the most important question, can you look at the model number on your meter? It was a small detail, but in my line of work, the devil was always, always in the details. After a week, Arthur came back with his notebook. It was full. He'd spoken to nearly 50 households in our community, and the neighboring one, which was also mostly retirees. A clear pattern had emerged. Every single person who reported a massive unexplainable spike in their bill had the same model of smart meter, the Viridian SmartRid Model 7. The few people who said their bills were stable, or had even gone down slightly, had a newer version, the Model 9. And guess what else? Arthur said, tapping his finger on the notebook. The Henderson kid, the one who just moved into his parents' old house down the street. He gutted the place. Total renovation. Viridian made him upgrade his whole electrical panel, and they gave him a brand new
Yo.
Model 9 meter. His bill is $120 a month. He runs the air conditioning all day. It was more than a correlation. It was a clear dividing line. The old meters were in the old houses, owned by the old people. The new meters were in the new houses or the renovated ones. It was a form of technological redlining. I now had my target. I wasn't just looking for a bug. I was looking for a bug that specifically affected the Model 7 meters. I turned back to my computer. The time for reconnaissance was over. It was time to write some code. I fired up a Python development environment. My fingers, stiff at first, quickly found their old rhythm on the keyboard. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep. The logic flowed. It was a simple program, elegant in its purpose. It would use Viridian's own public API to pull the last 2 years of daily usage data for every single meter in our zip code. 92557, thousands of them. It would sort them by meter model number, which was also part of the public data. Then it would compare the average usage increase, year over year, for the Model 7S versus the Model 9S. It took me the better part of 3 days to write and debug the script. I worked late into the night, the only light in the house coming from the glow of my 2 monitors. The world outside my study ceased to exist. It was just me and the machine, just like the old days. Arthur would occasionally knock on my door and leave a sandwich and a glass of iced tea, which I would consume without ever taking my eyes off the screen. He was my ground control. Finally, the script was ready. I took a deep breath and hit run. The program began to work, sending out data requests, one after another, a quiet, relentless digital army. The screen filled with scrolling text as it pulled in the data packets. It took almost an hour to download everything. Thousands of data points, representing millions of individual meter readings, a mountain of information. When it was done, the script began its analysis. It churned through the numbers, running the calculations I had programmed. It was only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. And then it was done. The results were displayed on my screen. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, and I saw it. The aha moment, the ghost in the machine. It was stark, it was undeniable. The meters in the Model 9 group showed an average annual usage increase of 1.2%, consistent with minor inflation in energy costs and normal yearly fluctuations. The meters in the Model 7 group, however, showed an average annual usage increase of 47.8%. It was a statistical impossibility. It was a smoking gun. The data visualization I'd programmed told the story better than numbers ever could. It was a graph showing 2 lines. One for the Model 9S was nearly flat. The other for the Model 7S shot upwards like a rocket, but I wasn't done. The what was clear. Now I needed the how. Why was this happening? I dug deeper into the API documentation, looking for anything specific to the older Model 7. And I found it, a small footnote in a technical manual about how the Model 7 transmitted its data packets in a slightly different legacies format. The documentation even included a few sample lines of code showing how to parse this older format. It was meant for developers. It was meant to be helpful. For Viridian, it was a catastrophic mistake. I stared at the sample code, and then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. It was a rookie mistake, a disgusting, sloppy first-year computer science student mistake. It was a for loop, designed to read the blocks of data inside a packet. The loop's termination condition was flawed. It was using a less than or equal to operator instead of a simple less than this. This meant the loop would run 1 extra time for every single data packet it processed. On that final redundant cycle, it was grabbing a meaningless piece of memory, a bit of digital noise, and adding it to the total usage for that reading. It was a tiny amount each time, a fraction of a kilowatt hour. Insignificant on its own, but the meters sent data thousands of times a day. Multiplied by thousands of Model 7 meters across the county, across the state. Those tiny fractions were adding up, they were compounding. It was a digital parasite, slowly and silently draining millions of dollars from the people least able to afford it. It wasn't a hardware failure. It was a software bug. A single character in a single line of code. A single character in a single line of code. And I had found it. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning in protest. I looked at the line of faulty code on my screen. It was beautiful in its ugliness. It was the face of the ghost. I knew then that I had them, completely and utterly. The next phase was execution. A plan without action is just a daydream. My action would not be a phone call or an angry letter. It would be a surgical strike. For the next 2 days I did not code. I wrote. I drafted a report, not as an angry customer, but as a senior systems analyst, the kind of report I would have submitted to my division head at IBM. The document was cool, professional, and utterly damning. It was titled Critical Bug Report, Systemic Overbilling, Originating from Flawed Parsing of Smart Red Model 7 Data Packets. I laid it all out, the methodology of my analysis, the public data sources I used, with direct links to Veridian's own website, the statistical breakdown, complete with the graphs that showed the glaring discrepancy between the 2-meter models, and then the final, kill shot, a section titled Root Cause Analysis. In it I included the sample code from their own documentation, and I highlighted the single line of faulty code. Right above it, I added a comment, the same kind of comment I had written thousands of times in my career. It read //ERR, redundant loop cycle, due to incorrect result is systematic inflation of usage totals for all Model 7 units. I converted the document to a PDF. It was 12 pages long, dense with facts, and was 12 pages long, dense with facts, and irrefutable. Now who to send it to? Not Brenda in customer service. Not some faceless info@veridian.com. Email address. I needed to deliver this report directly to the brainstem of the organization. I went back to my research, this time on LinkedIn. I searched for Veridian Power Solutions and scrolled through their executive hierarchy. And there he was, Bryce Miller, Vice President of Engineering. His profile picture showed a man in his late 30s, with a sharp suit, a sharper haircut, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His bio was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords, synergizing legacy infrastructure with next-gen smart grid solutions, driving shareholder value through optimized operational efficiency. He had an MBA from a fancy school to go along with his engineering degree. He was the new breed of corporate man, the kind who cared more about spreadsheets than systems. He was everything I wasn't. He was the perfect target. It took me less than 20 minutes, using a few old online tools, to figure out Veridian's corporate email naming convention and derive Bryce Miller's direct email address. I composed a new email. The subject line was simple and professional. Urgent bug report. Systemic overbilling and metering software. The body of the email was even simpler. Mr. Miller, please find the attached report for your immediate attention. I believe it details a significant and costly error in your data processing software. I trust you will treat it with the seriousness it deserves. Sincerely, Quentin Murdoch. I attached the PDF. Then came the final crucial step. I moved my cursor to the BCC field. Blind carbon copy. The secret weapon. The invisible arrow. I typed in the email address I had found on the state government's website, consumer.protection@ag.state.us. The Attorney General's office. They wouldn't see Bryce Miller's name. Bryce Miller wouldn't see theirs. My report would land in both their inboxes simultaneously, a silent ticking time bomb. I took a deep, steadying breath, my finger hovering over the mouse. I thought of Arthur having to choose between his pills and his power. I thought of Brenda's condescending chuckle. I thought of Helen's dream of a quiet, predictable life. I clicked send. The email vanished from my outbox. The only sound in my study was the quiet hum of the computer. A profound silence. I had launched the missile. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. The first 24 hours were the quietest. I did nothing. I checked my email obsessively, but there was no reply from Bryce Miller or the Attorney General. A part of me, the old cynical part, began to wonder if I'd just shouted into the void. Maybe they'd just delete it, dismiss it as the ramblings of a crank. I forced myself to go about my day. I mowed my lawn. I went to the grocery store. I tried to read a book, but I couldn't focus. I was waiting. The first sign that my missile had hit its target didn't come in an email. It came from Arthur. He called me on the second day, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Quentin, you will not believe this," he said. "I was just talking to Margaret over on Elm Street, you know, in the Briarwood development. They're all seniors over there, too. She said 2 Viridian trucks showed up this morning, unannounced, and started swapping out all the meters on her street. They were working fast. She said they told her it was a mandatory hardware upgrade. No charge." I felt a cold, triumphant smile spread across my face. They were trying to erase the evidence. They had received my report, understood the implications, and were now scrambling to replace all the Model 7 meters before anyone else figured it out. It was a silent, panicked recall, but it was too late. I had the data. I had saved every last byte of it to 3 separate hard drives. Their attempt to clean the crime scene was, in itself, an admission of guilt. The real confirmation came late that afternoon. An email finally appeared in my inbox. It was from Bryce Miller. The message was short, terse, and reeked of panic veiled in corporate aggression. It read, "Mr. Murdoch, we are in receipt of your unsolicited report. Our analysis is ongoing. Please be advised that any unauthorized access to our systems is a violation of federal law. Our legal department will be in contact with you shortly." I laughed out loud. A real hearty laugh that echoed in my quiet house. He didn't deny it. He didn't say I was wrong. He went straight to a threat. The classic move of a guilty man, with his back against the wall. That was the magic word. It was the corporate equivalent of a cornered animal baring its teeth. They were scared. They were terrified. I knew with absolute certainty that my little report had sent a shockwave all the way to the top of Viridian Power Solutions. The silent takeover was complete. The power had shifted from their boardroom to my little study, and their panic was just beginning. The counterattack was as predictable as it was pathetic. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived via courier. It was from a high-priced law firm in the city, the kind with a name made of a string of other names, like a parody of legal prestige. Inside was a cease and desist letter. The counterattack was its word tatter and thitter. So dilator Kirk. It was 5 pages of pure bluster and intimidation. It accused me of everything from computer fraud to corporate espionage. It claimed I had used sophisticated hacking techniques to illegally breach their proprietary and confidential systems. It demanded I immediately destroy all data I had collected and sign an affidavit confirming I had done so, or face the full, wrathful force of their legal might. It was designed to scare an ordinary person into submission. But I wasn't an ordinary person, and their central claim was a lie. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my computer. I drafted a reply, not to Bryce Miller, but directly to the lawyer who had signed the letter, a Mr. Abernathy. My email was even shorter than Bryce's had been. Subject: your letter dated October 26th. Dear Mr. Abernathy, all data referenced in my report was acquired via your client's publicly documented and publicly accessible API, as per their own open data initiative. I have attached the relevant documentation from Viridian's website for your convenience. I have not breached any systems, nor used any hacking techniques. I simply read the information your client chose to make public. Sincerely, Quentin Murdoch. I attached the PDF of their own API manual. And of course I forwarded the entire email chain, their threatening letter, and my calm, factual reply to my new friends at the Attorney General's office. That, it seemed, was the tipping point. The bluster from the law firm ceased immediately. The silence from Viridian became a tangible thing, a heavy, nervous vacuum. They didn't know I had BCC'd the AG. They thought they were dealing with one old man. They had just inadvertently confessed to the state's lead consumer protection agency that their first response to a report of systemic fraud was to legally threaten the whistleblower. Then the call I was waiting for came. It was a woman named Maria Reyes, an investigator from the Attorney General's office. Her voice was sharp, professional, and devoid of any condescension. "Mr. Murdoch," she said, "Investigator Reyes here. We received your emails, both of them. Your report is compelling, and their lawyer's response is, shall we say, illuminating." I could almost hear the smile in her voice. "We are opening a formal investigation into the billing practices of Viridian Power Solutions. Would you be willing to share your full data set and the script you wrote with our office?" "I would be delighted," I said. "I have it all saved." "Excellent," she replied. "You've done remarkable work, Mr. Murdoch." Truly, that was it. The power shift was complete and total. It was no longer me versus them. It was the state versus them. The story began to leak out. A reporter from the local newspaper, a young, eager kid, called me. Someone had given him an anonymous tip. I suspect it was someone in the AG's office, or maybe even a disgruntled employee inside Viridian. I gave him a few carefully chosen quotes, sticking to the facts, painting myself as a concerned citizen. The first article was small, buried on page B. Seniors question power bills. A week later, after the AG's office served their first subpoena, it was a front-page headline. State launches probe into Viridian's billing practices. Allegations of systemic overcharging. My little community was buzzing. People would stop me on the street, shake my hand. I was no longer just Quentin, the quiet widower. I was the man who was fighting back. Viridian made one last desperate move. My phone rang one evening. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered. "Quentin, it's Bryce Miller." His voice was different now. The arrogant corporate sheen was gone, replaced by a thin, strained attempt at friendliness. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Listen, Quentin," he began. "I think there's been a big misunderstanding, a simple software glitch that got blown way out of proportion." I stayed silent. I let him talk. "Look, we value you as a customer. We value all our legacy customers," he said, stumbling over the word legacy. "To show our goodwill, and to avoid any more unpleasantness for you, the company has authorized me to make you an offer. We will cut you a check for $10,000. We'll replace your meter, of course, and wipe your last 6 months of bills. All we ask in return is that you sign a standard non-disclosure agreement. You agree not to speak about this to the press or any third party. It's a win-win. You're made whole, and we can put this unfortunate matter behind us." There it was, the hush money, the attempt to buy my silence, to isolate me from the community I was fighting for. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I could hear his nervous breathing on the other end of the line. Finally I spoke. My voice was calm, cold, and final. "Mr. Miller," I said slowly, "this was never about the $10,000. It was never about my bill. It's about Arthur's bill. It's about Mrs. Gable's bill. It's about the hundreds, maybe thousands of people living on fixed incomes that your simple software glitches has been robbing blind for years." I paused, letting the words sink in. "My report wasn't a negotiation, Mr. Miller. It was a notification. The Attorney General has had my data for over a week now. I imagine their subpoenas are quite thorough. You talk about making me whole. Your only concern right now should be making my entire community whole. Your move." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing more to say. The confrontation was over. The war was won. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The Attorney General's investigation became the biggest local news story of the year. Viridian's stock price tumbled. The story was picked up by national news outlets, a classic David and Goliath tale, the retired IBM engineer who brought a corporate giant to its knees with a few lines of code. The public pressure was immense. Veridian's CEO, a man who probably hadn't even known Bryce Miller's name a month before, was forced to hold a press conference. He stood at a podium looking pale and grim and offered a groveling public apology. He blamed a deeply regrettable legacy software error and announced that Bryce Miller had been separated from the company. It was a public execution. Best of all, he announced that Veridian would be undertaking a massive multi-million-dollar refund program. They would be proactively identifying every customer with a Model 7 meter, calculating the overcharges for the past 5 years, and issuing full refunds with 7% interest. They were also, he announced, replacing every single Model 7 meter in their service area, free of charge. My phone rang off the hook. Reporters, television producers, even a book agent. I turned them all down. I did one interview with the young reporter from the local paper who broke the story. I sat on my porch with Arthur beside me, and I calmly told the truth. I wasn't a hero. I was just a man who knew how to read, who knew that when the data doesn't make sense, you don't question the customer, you question the code. I became a local celebrity, the citizen coder, as one headline called me. The gray hat hacker of Maple Creek. It was all a bit much. The real vindication wasn't the headlines. It was the quiet moments that followed. It was seeing the Veridian trucks, not working in secret anymore, but crawling all over our neighborhood, methodically replacing every old meter with a brand new, accurate one. It was the day Arthur came over to my house, waving a check in his hand. It was his refund from Veridian. It was for $4,672. That's my heart medicine for the next 3 years, Quentin, he said, his eyes welling up. That's peace of mind. That was my victory. That was the new reality. A few weeks later, everything had settled down. The news cycle moved on. The Veridian trucks were gone. Life in Maple Creek Villas returned to its quiet, predictable rhythm, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a comfortable quiet, free from the anxiety that had been humming beneath the surface. I was sitting on my porch swing, the one Helen and I had loved, nursing a glass of iced tea. Arthur was in the chair beside me. We were watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My latest power bill was on the small table between us. It was for $78. Arthur's was for $82. We'd compared them, like two old friends comparing fishing stories, and had a good laugh. It feels strange, doesn't it? After all that noise, for things to be so normal. But I guess that was the whole point. We weren't asking for a special deal. We were just asking for a fair one. You know, it's a funny thing getting older. The world seems to be in such a hurry to write you off. They think your experience is outdated, your skills are obsolete, your mind is slowing down. They see a 67-year-old man, and they don't see the 30 years of solving complex problems. They see a target for a condescending sales pitch, or an easy person to blame. They think we're not watching, they think we're not paying attention, but we are. We have something the fast-paced, synergizing, next-gen world often lacks. We have time. We have patience, and we have a lifetime of accumulated knowledge. The technology changes, the jargon gets more ridiculous, but the fundamentals never do. Logic is still logic. Right is still right. And a bug is still a bug. They thought I was just a relic, a fossil from a bygone era of computing. They forgot that we relics are the ones who built the foundations they're all standing on. And every now and then we have to come out of retirement to fix the cracks in our own work. So here's my message to you. Don't let anyone make you feel invisible. Don't let anyone dismiss you because you don't fit their idea of what's current or relevant. Question your bills. Question the official story. Help your neighbors do the same. You never know the skills you have tucked away that might be the exact tool needed to make things right. And if you're one of those young, smart people in a position of power, maybe take a moment before you dismiss the next old man who calls with a complaint. You have no idea who he is. You have no idea what he's capable of. He might just know how your whole system works better than you do. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, and maybe subscribe for more stories from folks who decided they weren't going to be invisible anymore. And please, share your own stories in the comments below. I'll be reading them, because everyone deserves to be heard.